Nick, what's your topic?
Well, first off, let me give a quick shout out to a near dear friend of mine, Mr. Jimmy Champagne.
Jimmy Champagne.
Champagne.
Hey, Baba Ganoush, I'm in New York. I got a Spider-Man.
He invited.
So, Spider-Man, I'm going to spring all my things over here for you to web to that fucking movie.
Are you
C.
done?
Thomas Howell's greatest work. Mr. Champagne invited me to his podcast, and we've been going back and forth because I think I messed up the audio record on my side. So he's got like hours and hours and hours
Of just dead silence?
No, it's like for some reason the tempo's going up and down and up and down, so he's got to like fix that as he goes.
Oh, wow. What a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. It's almost not worth it. Almost. But now you got a shout out on the GameOverGreggy show. What up, Champagne? My topic tonight.
It'd be helpful to shout off their name of the podcast you're going to be on.
It's the Jimmy and Eden podcast.
There you go.
It's really good. It's on NBC.
Bing, bong, bing.
It's not on NBC. Google it.
All right, fucking go.
So I wonder this sometimes because when I was a kid, I really. Someone asked me a topic, what do you want to be when you were a kid? We'll get into that later. My answer is Batman. I wanted to be Batman. That was the first thing I can remember thinking about being. As I get older, though, it strikes me that it might be a little weird and or terrifying if Batman were real.
Absolutely. That would not be cool.
So that's what I want to talk about. What if Batman were real? What if there was a man who was like 6'4"?
And I'm assuming we're living in a universe where there's no
other superheroes.
So it's real life right
villains
now, and all of a
of
sudden
that.
there's a Batman
But-
fighting crime.
So my question is there a comic book Batman in this universe? Are there comic books in this universe?
It's this universe.
So right now, we
Right
already
now,
have all these Batman
there's a
comic books.
Batman.
Somebody says I'm Batman. Okay. I'm with you.
Wait. I want to verify this. Obviously, there are comic books in the universe.
Sure.
That's a weird question because there are comic books of other kinds. Certainly.
In the Walking Dead universe, no one's ever heard of the zombie. They don't have that concept. That's why no one ever calls walkers zombies.
Oh, that makes that show even worse.
It's a property long outside of just the show, but okay.
So, but Batman doesn't exist in comic form.
I haven't thought this far, but we can say yes, Batman doesn't exist
Okay.
in comics.
He's an original
I like to
IP.
think
Okay.
this is right now. Some dude starts doing this.
Right, and
What's
there's-
our reaction?
So you're changing it.
So you're saying
What's different about
we
this?
know that there's a Batman. Some guy just decides to be Batman today
Yeah.
because he's read the comic books and wants to be Batman.
Yeah.
Okay. He's a joke. Though. Nobody
I
takes
was
him
thinking
seriously.
more along the terms of like the comic book, like superheroes don't exist. And we're living in a shitty city, like, well, you know, like we're living in San Francisco, and all of a sudden,
What's
to
he
fight
doing? He's
crime,
busting fucking Muni drivers sleeping on the job.
we start hearing about a guy who's running around dressed as a bat,
Yeah.
and he's cleaning up the city of the Tenderloin.
Okay.
It's terrifying though, right? Like I think as a normal human being, I'd be like, I'm not gonna go in the Tenderloin
100%.
because there's a dude who, like, you're just walking, right, and you're smoking a cigarette, and then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, some dude comes from the sky and just takes you out.
There was a Hey Arnold episode about this.
Was there?
With Monkey Man. And it didn't end well for Monkey Man.
So at any point, do we think this
I
character?
just don't acknowledge.
I'm trying to stay on topic.
Sure.
At any point, do we acknowledge that this might be a cool thing, or is it just terrifying?
I think it's the same thing that happens in every Batman film, right? Where it would be we wouldn't believe people for the longest time.
Right.
Then it would be like you're like being a coward about it. Why would you Why would he jump on somebody smoking a cigarette in the Tenderloin? He's looking for bad guys. It's every story that's coming up in the news about some guy getting dropped in front of the police commissioner's office is he's a bad guy. It's not like Batman's like fucking capturing normal people out of, on a date or something.
But also,
But then there's gonna be the big moment of there's a fire. There's that giant Mission Bay fire, right? And then he's gonna jump out like in his cape and have like a kid under his arm. And be like, what? It's good. He's
that'd
awesome.
be a good moment.
Yeah.
And then he's just Bat Kid from
But
then on out.
then he just lands on the ground in broad daylight, and everybody's like,
Yeah.
"What do we do now?"
So I think the thing there, in real life, there has been a bunch of these quote unquote superheroes.
Yeah.
They're like dudes that dress up and try to do good. But this is different. Like, the way you phrase this to me, it makes me think this guy's legit.
He's
This guy
legit.
is
This
as
real guy is
legit
like
as Batman
not
would be.
some
Christian
ass.
Bale Batman. Is, doing his
So
thing.
you're right. We don't hear about him. We don't really know how he looks or any of these things until some people see him. Some people see the
But see,
whole
now
thing.
you're starting to make it sound cool.
It is
No,
cool.
it's really cool, but it's also terrifying. Like, I think that is the most terrifying thing ever is that this guy's fighting crime. In the comic world, it's like, oh, yeah, he's a good guy. We're rooting for him. But in real life, it's like, that's not up to you to decide if it's good or bad. Like, that's not your position, Mr. Batman. Like, we have a law system, and things like that.
Well, yeah,
It doesn't work.
Let's not take into account that if there were a bunch of people running around fighting crime,
I like the quotes.
none of that would actually hold up in court. At no point
Vigilanteism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd
Citizens
be
arrest.
vigilanteism. Yeah, there's no. But how you going to prove it?
I know you got to take.
Hey, I
the
found this
stand.
guy robbing a bank. Really? There's no footage of it. It's just your word versus his.
And that's the other thing. It's like Batman, he won't kill people, but he fucks them up.
He
Like,
messes
that's
jacks
not
people
nice.
up. It's
And
true.
like, if you just beat the shit out of someone leaving in front of a police department, that's scary as shit.
Yeah, that's messed up. It's messed up.
I have a big question that we haven't touched on. Because we're talking about he's going to the Tenderloin, which is a terrible part of San Francisco, by the way, in case you're curious why we're talking about it. And he goes and he fucks up people that are robbing cars or whatever they're doing, right? But do the supervillains exist?
I was
in
gonna
this
say,
universe?
I
I'm
knew it
waiting
was
for
coming.
When's the Bane coming? When are we talking?
I'm not even talking about
Bane?
Bane. Let's ignore Bane. He's the best. We know that already.
Sure.
But like, are there like criminal masterminds, i.e. the Riddler,
It's-
Joker?
I want to say no, and I want to say that they
Because if not, then we don't need a guy like Batman.
It's
What's
up to
the
them
fucking
if they
point?
come or not.
What is the point?
No, see, this is always the Achilles heel or whatever. The
Anyone
the
can be
endless struggle here is that Batman's actions create these supervillains.
Yep.
So like right now, like we just had that citizen alderman, what was he, senator who got busted, Lee Lin Yi, right, for all the gun running and stuff. That's a Batman takedown, but instead of like it all coming to light slowly, like the DA would have gotten the files from Batman, he would have gone to do it, and somebody would have gotten kicked into a tub of acid and become
Wait,
this
so
horrible
you're
thing.
saying that? Okay,
So
so
Leland Yee is Two-Face? That's what happens here? Or is he the Joker?
I was thinking more of the Joker.
Okay.
And it might not have been him. It might have just been one of his thugs.
Got it.
but when Batman was created in the 30s, 40s, right?
His 75th anniversary is this year.
Okay, so
30s.
yeah.
40s. No, 40s.
I can't do
Math.
Yeah, no, the 40s. Okay, so when he was created in the 40s, the Joker was the first villain, right? And he was the product of something Batman did. Batman.
No, I mean, we're talking about these cartoons, like the early comics. No, these people are just popping up, and they're like, "Bah." But I mean, like most Joker like stories from there on out. I mean, like when you start talking and treating it like literature, right? Or you're actually telling a real story rather than just something to sell a 10-cent comic book. That's when you get into Batman's actions are almost always.
When did
tied.
they start?
1939.
39.
Yeah.
When did they get? That makes sense. That's math. When did that I can't do very well. I'm a writer.
We all got on the spot where it's like, no, can't do that one for you.
Try to use my head, but I can't do it. What specifically, is? I guess what I'm saying is like, when did they start telling these stories? Like it wasn't just Batman, just, hitting the Joker and like all all that, like all that kind of stuff. But like, where they were like getting into like deep the minutia of Batman and who he was that post-war, I guess, and then like significantly
What, you're
post-war.
talking about the minutia of like his parents dying and stuff.
No, I mean just the minutia of like you're trying to tell real stories as opposed to the pulpy comic books.
Sure.
Of the pre-war era, like, and they all were like that. I know. I don't know much about comics, but I know that. And like, so when did they start getting into like the real lore, like where there was like huge threads and
arcs and stuff that
yeah,
matter.
and, like,
I mean, like it depends on how you want to look.
looking back at comics to me, and I could be totally wrong about this because I don't really know the history that well, but like for Spider-Man, the death of Gwen Stacy is like, I think regarded as one of like the first big moments in comics that are like, this is a serious thing.
Yeah.
And like there's stories that mean something and are going somewhere and it's not all just stupid fun.
Right.
When did that happen? I want to say the 80s. Probably
No.
totally wrong.
It was way earlier than
really?
that. Let me Google.
Let me ask you another question.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this.
It's impossible to find out.
When did comic books become relevant again? I don't mean that in a snarky way.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean that in like when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, like comics were not significant or important at all. Like
1973, Death of Gwen Stacy.
Like we had like Batman, but that was like a reincarnation starting in the late 80s. We hadn't seen anything Batman since the 60s at that point, really. And like, except for the comics.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And then that begat the cartoons.
You're talking about
like
mainstream
that.
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so we had Batman, we had the Superman, like really slick Superman series that was in the same style as Batman, which was cool. And then we had like the X-Men movie in the early 2000s, I think, which was like really the beginning of like the kind of the Marvel comeback. But I don't remember comics being significant. Like if I grew up more today, like as a millennial, I assume that comics would be a bigger part of my life because they were just a bigger part of cultural mainstream. So I guess what I'm saying is like, were comics always kind of the same big? And I think the collection of people on the internet and all that kind of stuff made it bigger, or just that we were more aware of this
I hear you saying.
this subculture existing, or did comics just kind of come back? Because I'm telling you, like it wasn't weird to me and my friends that we weren't into comics. I didn't know fucking anyone that was into
No,
comics.
I was the odd man out in my group of friends who read comics.
But
and
I feel like
that's what
today
they did.
everyone seems to be reading comics, and I'm like, I
think that's just because of the group we run with. Like I don't know many other people.
Well, it's
that read
it's a number of
comics.
things, right? It's that you can get comics now easily for free if you want on your iPad, and 2, there's comic book movies that made them incredibly relevant mainstream. But I'm with Colin. Like, I mean, growing up, I used to go to a comic book store.
Buying your Pokemon cards.
Yeah,
Did you catch them all?
I used to get Pogs.
Oh, yeah.
Pogs. I was
Yeah.
bummed.
Pogs.
I never really. I mean, I would buy a comic here and there, but to me, it was so hard. It was too hard. I'm like, I don't know where to jump in, and I don't really want to. I'd pick something up that was like, there was a cool run of Batman versus a Predator for a while. It was rad. I was like, I'll get all of these. That was cool. But I think that the comic book industry suffered very, very hard in the 80s and 90s because there was nothing.
Marvel was bankrupt at one
There
point.
was no like energizing factor. They didn't have the big movies. But it would be interesting to look at and see if comics are still struggling as an actual
It's hard to
media.
Yeah, it's now they're multimedia companies. What we're talking about, I think, is a lot like the games industry, right? And the fact that when comics were being treated as kids' toys, they were just kids' toys. And then when they let comics started breaking through and doing different things and evolving, which I think is happening in our lifetime, right? Where the Batman movie hits, it's Tim Burton, it's dark. They make the character way darker in the comics, and then they start to explore these different things and these different avenues, and the death of Superman, and making deaths matter, even though they never really stick. But coming back and doing different things, like you see people in the same way, like I always talk about video games, right? Where like I understand senators freaking out about it because they remember video games being their 8-year-old playing Mario, and then they stop playing games, and now they hear they can kill a hooker in a game, and they think of Mario, and they're 8-year-old playing it. This is the same thing here, where you have a generation that's grown up with comic books and stuff like Marv Wolfman's Teen Titans that were stories that had impact, mattered to them. So then they grow up, make their own comics, and get to start making all these stories that matter. And it might not be Supergirl or the Harley Quinn book that's like really pushing the envelope and making comics matter to people. It's now just like video games. There's these independent stories and independent comics and graphic novels people are putting out. They're just telling stories of people in their everyday lives. That's what matters. You know what I mean? Or going and pushing it down this, exploring all these different paths that you can do now. That it's easier to get comics and you don't have to worry about it. And the internet is there to be the driving force. I always think about it, in the way of like, I was the odd man out, right? In my group. Nobody else cared about comics. And so like, I remember when AOL started joining an AOL chat room group where we role played as heroes, and we'd get together every Thursday night, and we would just like be in this chat room acting like superheroes or whatever. Not like saving the day, but just like hanging out, right? Because it's like how, but now you can do that in a second from a million different ways, and message boards and your friends and Skype and all these different things. You go to Comic-Con or a PAX, you meet someone who's like-minded, you move across the country, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I would like to see the numbers and the like video games are an interesting example because video games have only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The internet has helped that, but video games were already arcing up and they've never arced it down. Like it's just strange. You would think that they were kind of kindred, and you would think that the people that were into games would be into comics and vice versa. Like I'm super into games. I don't care about comics, and like I feel like that's actually the exception. I don't feel that attached to nerd culture generally in a lot of ways. I have like significant connections to it in terms of video games. I have significant connections with it in terms of sci-fi, but I don't, I love high fantasy too, and then like the fictional novelizations and all these kinds of things, Tolkien, like Bradbury, all that kind of stuff. I love that kind of stuff, but I don't even feel like that's really that nerdy. And maybe that's just like me. Like even Battlestar's nerdy, but I don't even feel like Battlestar is like that disconnected. It's a soap opera, but it's in space.
Battlestar's pretty nerdy.
But like I I draw the line somewhere, and it's not even me being like I don't want to be into this. It's just like I'm not. I don't care. When I see something like the Arrow, I'm like this is just or Arrow whatever.
Arrow.
I'm like this is corny. But then I think about some of the video games I like, and they're corny. And so like I'm like well maybe it's just the way I like to consume my content and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think comics are so different just because of the commitment. It's like there's so much that it's different than the other medias where it's kind of scared when you first start off. You're like, there is nowhere for me to jump in, and yeah, in a lot of ways the internet kind of fixed that where it's like Wikipedia, you can kind of catch up, jump in wherever you want, and then also iPads and all these things that just make it so easy to jump in whenever you want.
Heads up. A Greg way about what comics you should jump in and read that you can find here on GameOverGreggy.com. A lot of people still tweet me out of the blue and be like, hey, I want to get into comics. Where do I start? And there you go.
Start with that random issue of X-Men I bought in the 90s with Psylocke on the cover.
I think about that one too.
Because I thought she was cool.
So hot.
Yeah, she was hot. I bought a few comics when I was a kid. I would go. My brother is an animator, really into art, really into anime, and he would buy manga, not comics.
Manga?
But we would go to the city and go to these things, and I would buy G.I. Joe comic books, but I wasn't buying them. And the G.I. Joe comic books in the 80s were raw, man. And I wasn't buying them because they were comics. I was buying them because they were G.I. Joe, and then I would cut them up and put cool pictures on my wall.
Yeah.
With them.
Yeah.
Just like I did with I feel so bad. Like I have a fucking shitload of Nintendo Powers, and from the late 80s all the way to like 1998 or 1999. And I go through them sometimes, or like my old EGMs or PSMs, and I just like cut so much shit out of these magazines, man. Like I used to have in high school, especially. I had like a whole wall in my room that was just game ads, like cool ads for games.
Yeah, me too. For me, it was all Nintendo Power. Those like the fold-out posters. My
Yeah.
room was just covered in them.
Yeah, I wish I didn't do that. I'm like, why am I putting advertisements on my wall? So there were
look
really
cool.
cool ads in the 90s for games, but like every SquareSoft ad and
I miss those times though. I feel like there's never going to be another time like that for kids, when like you were so cut off from everything that when a magazine came, you were stoked to see what that fold out was going to be.
Never gonna
different,
know what was
though.
gonna be on the next page.
Yeah, I mean, like that is definitely one of my greatest memories of my life. Like that is what
Like
everything's
you
about.
even
It's why I'm
just
at
saying
where
that is
I'm here.
awesome.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah,
it makes me think about being a kid.
exactly.
Yeah, no one.
It's
It's
good, man.
It's impossible. It's like Game Informer still exists, and a few of these other like kind of nerd magazines exist, but they don't have the same power anymore at all. Not only in terms of circulation, but in terms of the power of appearing in your mailbox. Like you said, like when I got, in the 1992, 1993, when I got a Nintendo Power, like my life stopped
Yeah.
Yeah.
for like an entire day.
Being
And I
so
would-
excited to get a new EGM.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know what the fuck any of these games are. I would read every word of every page.
I would go back and read the reviews of the games that I don't care about, but
It was something
Oh, yeah.
special.
Yeah.
It's impossible to relate to that if you didn't grow up in that era, because it's just not like that anymore. Now we have sites like IGN that IGN existed back then too, but
Ruins everything.
But like where it's just like everything like PS4 sold 7 million units. 10 minutes later, it's on the site. If that happened in the middle of a cycle for a magazine, you'd wait 2 weeks and you would never know, that happened
Yeah.
unless you were reading, a nerdy forum on a corner of the internet somewhere. Like I love that kind of shit, man. And I do miss that. And I used to get a fucking ton of magazines in the mail.
Yeah.
Star Wars Insider, EGM, Nintendo Power, all like, nerdy ass like history magazines and like all, and that was awesome. And then you'd like pour through them, and then you bring them to school and read them at lunch. Toy Fair was another one. I
Oh,
used to
Toy
get.
Fair was so good.
And,
Zach the Malamute.
I love
I
Toy
still
Fair.
have a lot of. The only magazine that I ever actually thought about subscribing to, and my mom wouldn't let me because it was
Maxim.
way too expensive. No, was Next Gen. Remember that magazine?
Next Generation was awesome.
It was.
really slick, big.
It was
Big
big. It
magazine.
had that cool
The
cover
cover.
to
Oh,
it. That paper.
see, another thing is the OPM with its
The demo
discs.
disc, that was
Like,
always
that
huge.
was such a game
Oh,
changer.
yeah.
Like, and that's another thing. In the same way you'd read all these things over and over, like demo discs back then, you'd play so many games
PC
over and
gamer.
over that sucked. Like I remember I played the 102 Dalmatians game
Yeah.
a million times just because that was the demo of the month and I wanted to beat all the things on it, and that was awesome.
Yeah, that was cool. I remember with PSM, my buddy got the first issue of PSM was Final Fantasy VII was on the cover, I think. It was 97. And I had just got my PlayStation at that time for Final Fantasy VII. And I went to his party. We played hockey on the same team. Went to his party. It was this awesome magazine. I was going through it, and it had the lid cover. You guys remember the lid covers for PS1? So every episode, every issue of PSM came with a new lid cover.
yeah.
And the first one was like that smiley face, which was like their logo. And then every month you'd get a new one. And I would take I got PSM for like ever until I was in college. And I only paid for it for 1 year. They just kept sending it to me. I have no idea. I paid $12 for that.
Hard to believe that business model isn't working.
Well, I don't know why they never billed me again. They just never did. I paid $12 for it in 1997 and never
They
paid
saw
for it
something
again.
special in you.
You're gonna get a huge bill now.
I don't think they exist anymore. I love those guys though. Some of my favorite writers. And I would take the lid cover every month and put it on top of my PS1. And then like years later, like my PS1 would just be like another half an inch
Super
tall
stacked.
because
Yeah.
it was like all these. And still on my door at home, my dad redid my room and like painted over all my shit because I used to write on my walls and like do all this crazy stuff. And like I had like a whole wall. I had like a huge 311 logo on it that I drew.
Of course.
That was behind my drum set in my room. And but the one thing he left was on my door handle is like the little smiley face logo from PSM, like one of
Nice.
the first PSMs, and it's like still on my like on the center of the thing. And I look at that, and I'm like, man, that was such a great magazine and a great time. Like I trusted them. Like
Yeah.
people trust us, like I
Yeah.
really trusted them, and they turned
Yeah.
me on to so many good games.
I love the covers. The art where it'd be
they would do like
an
proprietary
original art piece
yeah.
for it. Oh man, that was so good.
So I used to be heavily into PC gaming back when I was a kid. And I was, I told you guys stories of like how I used to have to like boot up my computer a special way to make sure I shut down all non-essential functions so like I could just keep enough processing power to run the games. And one of the things I remember being heartbroken about was because when you're a PC gamer, by the way, it was a limit to how long you had, because eventually things moved so fast that your system just wouldn't work anymore. It wasn't like you console gamers who were like, oh, it's so cool, everything has to work for my console. No, I mean, like, I remember getting
drivers and executables and
get new graphics cards and all these things, and that was before they even made new graphics cards or a graphics card. And so I remember I used to get these discs from, I think it was PC Gamer. Was it PC Gamer? Yeah, it was PC Gamer, and there was a game I think called like Fade to Black or something like that, which I thought was the coolest thing on the planet because it was a legitimate third-person shooter, which I hadn't seen that many of, and it was for the PC. And I tried to play it, and I tried as hard as humanly possible to get my system to run it, and it just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. That brings me back to the early days of emulators when the internet made it seem so easy to be able to play Super Mario RPG, which I never owned. And I was like, I rented it a bunch of times from Blockbuster, but I was too young to understand how to really play it. And when I got older, I was like maybe 13, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be awesome. Could never figure out like how to get ROMs playing and do all this shit just because.
Did you use SNES 9X or whatever it was
Yeah,
called?
Exactly.
Yeah, and Nesticle. Those were like
Nesticle,
those were I remember with an Apple I had an Apple II emulator, and you had to run something on your computer to make your computer run slower. Do you guys remember this? It was like a thing that would like cut the processing power of your computer so that the games in the Apple II emulator wouldn't run like a mile a minute. I don't know like what it was called. It was like something you had to like specially do to your computer, like to your system. This was in the 90s.
The overclocking? Is that what you're talking about?
No, that would be the exact opposite, right?
No, but I mean with overclocking though, you could set it lower too.
Yeah, I guess that's like it was something that like would eat your processing power. Do something. I'm not very technical. Where like it would make the Oregon Trail, whatever the fuck you were playing, Number Munchers. Would not like run like crazy because it was made for like a really slow computer. That was good. Those were good times. I haven't messed with emulators in a long time since my PSP was hacked and I had an NES emulator on that. And that was the last time I ever messed with them because I have all these cartridges.
PSP, the day that got hacked was like the best Christmas of my life, because then all of a sudden it's like I have every one of my childhood games in my hands, and it was so good. Yeah, like to PSP this day, PSP is still my like go-to portable of choice.
Oh, nice.
Just because I can play all my favorite games.
Okay. So I think we covered well what would happen if Batman was real.
Went off on a tangent on that one.
Nah, that's what happens.
Sure.
But it would be a disaster, basically. And he'd be killed probably right away.
Probably killed.
Yeah.
He'd be an outlaw.
No, brother. They have to find someone in the wreckage.